Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 48th. He's Kurt Davis. I'm Frank Camacho. We don't always agree on stuff, but we do talk about it.
Yes,
one of the things we don't agree on is what's going on at the Capitol all this week. A lot of public participation, a lot of people voicing their opinions against the governor's education budget. And there was a protest there on Wednesday. About 400 or 300 people showed up, according to the Arizona Republic. But you say the number was much less than that, right?
Yeah, I happened to be there, and it looked like to me some of the folks that maybe actually work for the school districts.
After hours, though.
No, that's fine, but
That's
they weren't. It wasn't the gaggle of parents that might have been presented as.
Well, that's just the beginning, but they are talking about this budget, and there is a lot of pushback on it. Well, even some of the lawmakers, Bob Worsley and Steve Pierce, have been talking about it.
This is just the beginning of the pushback. I mean, there's no good solutions in this budget. Again, the choice is there's going to be cuts. There's not a choice that there's not going to be cuts. There's going to be cuts. So what the governor tried to do is actually, well, if we're going to have cuts while we're going through that pain, let's at least put more money in the classroom, and that's what his proposal does. At the end of the day, it puts more money in the classroom. Less money for administrators.
Well, oh yeah, you know, there's a lot of ways of looking at it. And,
my violin is about this big for all those administrators.
But there is something there that is not being talked about as much, and that is the little bit of couple of $100 million that the state underfunded education, and it's still out there, that lawsuit.
The lawsuit.
Yeah, and what's going to do with it?
Well, absolutely. You do have a lawsuit outstanding, and that is going to have an impact. Probably not really actually till the following year's budget, or you could end up in a special. The lawsuit. I mean, a lot of things could happen. They can't make a budget based on what might or could happen. They have to make decisions based on what is the current state.
There is the appearance, at least, that perhaps, unlike years past where lawmakers and the governor kind of squabbled over the budget, kind of put it aside, get everything else done, then come April, really rush to get the budget done. Now it seems like they're trying to get it done earlier.
They're doing it right. Which is
or they're trying to push it down people's throat.
Well, they're going to get the budget. Things aren't going to change. The numbers aren't going to change. They have to make cuts. If you wait and you pass all the other legislation first and then you do the budget, you have nothing to hold rogue members in play with.
I think
doing the budget first is the smart strategy.
I think it was Bob Worsley, though, from Mesa, who said that there's some money out there. Maybe there's some money in private prisons. Well,
again, when we see, they're negotiating right now. They're in the cage, as they say, and they're negotiating a budget. There's going to be changes to that budget that's proposed by the leadership and the governor, but you have to get to that agreement first. Then there's going to be members that have things that they try to splinter off on the side. But I'm willing to bet you right here and now that the budget that is rolled out by the president, the speaker, and the governor is going to be remarkably close to the budget that's passed by the legislature.
How much you want to bet?
A couple beers, Frank.
Okay, you're on. You're on. There's drama going down at the state capitol, but there's also drama going on in Washington as well. As we're taping, the House and the Senate are debating
yeah, we're trying to scare everybody that the country is going to be unsafe. I'd like to remind people that DHS employees will work no matter what happens. They would then be back paid. It's different than a quote-unquote government shutdown where they're actually furloughed. Critical employees will still be in place. The nation will be safe. This is all theater and nothing more.
Then why are we going through this? Why don't they just do something and just cut
out all
Washington, cut out all the crap?
It's Washington.
I mean,
well, the House wants the president to have to sign a bill that retracts his executive orders.
People in Hades want ice water, so
and the Senate doesn't agree with that. So you have a fight with the Republicans. Either way, Homeland Security will continue to operate.
Okay, one other thing. Let's get back locally. The Morrison Concrete quarterly poll came out this week, and in it, education was very high on everyone's list, and it across party lines. And voters said they're willing to pay more in taxes to make sure that we get a quality education for our kids.
Actually, all the polls I saw last election cycle, work that I did in the polling arena, education always does pop up high, and it doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat. The problem with this kind of poll, though, is at the end of the day, it really matters what people who are going to actually show up and vote think.
And that gets to the point that President Obama was trying to make earlier this week during the town hall with Telemundo town hall and MSNBC. And a lot of Latinos were being critical of the president, and he argued back. He said
the whiner in chief was whining.
No, he wasn't whining. He wasn't whining. He was making a point, which was, if you voted, we would have had immigration reform.
The point is
already.
even bad. Yeah, if you don't vote, you don't even have the right to whine.
You know, we started this.
You have to show up to vote. Then you have a right to whine.
We started this segment by saying that we do disagree on some things, but there are some things we do agree on, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
If you don't vote, then just shut up.
Right.
Just shut
Absolutely.
up. You have no
And
right.
unfortunately, some of those numbers are going to be people that don't vote.
Now, I know that you're not really paying too much attention to this. Do you think some lawmakers might be paying attention to it?
No, not till next year.
Education is still going to be there.
It will be. It will be. It will be a top 3 issue. I have no doubt. It will be.
When we talk about education, we also talk about Common Core. There's a great deal of controversy over that. And we'll talk in depth with a lawmaker who does not like Common Core and an educator who does favor Common Core. And we'll have that discussion, yes, when the 48th continues. Stay with us.
The 48th is presented in part by Eastmark, the mark of something special, currently offering over 30 beautiful new quick move-in homes.
And welcome back to the 48th. And joining us now, our guests to discuss Common Core, the pros and cons. On the con side, we have Representative Paul Boyer, District 20, Northwest Phoenix and in Glendale. And David Garcia, an associate professor at ASU, and who was a Democratic candidate for superintendent of public instruction during the last election. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. And this week, Paul, the House Education Committee voted to get rid of Common Core.
That's right.
Why?
Well, we want local control from a state perspective. We believe that it's the state's responsibility. If you look in the U.S. Constitution, nowhere is education mentioned one time. And that's because the founders believed that education should be relegated to the states.
Where is it said that? Where does it say that?
10th Amendment. Anything not reserved to...
It's this pesky document called the Constitution. Right?
Okay, yeah. Specifically, that's talk about education. Okay, okay. You're for Common Core.
Well, I'm for the idea of getting our students ready to compete outside of Arizona. Representative Boyer is correct. It is a state responsibility, and I don't think we should relinquish that. However, we're in a circumstance right here where our students are competing not just with ourselves in Arizona, but with students nationally and internationally. And that getting our students ready for those kinds of workforce of the future lends itself to trying to understand how our students are doing relative to students across the country and across the world.
Do you find, I find in this debate, because I actually see both the pros and the cons on both sides of this issue. I think sometimes we get mired down because we now use code words like Common Core. Nobody knew what that was 5 years ago. This is really more about best practices between states, or is there a way to reach that, where we're more on a best practices conversation about improving teachers and improving outcomes and what other people are doing that are successful, as opposed to this fight over Common Core? Is there a different way to go about this altogether?
Well, I really think we need to focus on what is the end goal of education. What should we be focusing on as instructors, as administrators, and that's student learning. And if the Common Core's standards can help you get there, all well and good. But the problem is they were adopted during the worst fiscal crisis in our state history in 2010, or at least the kind of coming out of that. 2009 is when it began. We needed the money. We applied for Race to the Top money, and as a result, we just adopted willy-nilly the Common Core standards, and we're stuck
So
with
that
them.
was part of the deal to get the dough.
Correct. And so, but now we're being threatened with loss of funding from the feds if we opt out of them.
Well, I think though, look, we can go in and look at the standards, and Kurt, to your point, the standards in the Common Core have basically become a code word for everything wrong in public education. If there's an issue, it's the Common Core. So for instance, we just thought it was a good decision to no longer have a state high school graduation test. That was here well before the Common Core. Many of the issues that Arizona faces were here well before Common Core. And I think that if we're going to be smart and strategic about this, we need to separate what is specifically the issues with the Common Core, particularly the standards, and what are issues that are going to be here, have always been here in Arizona prior to the Common Core, and are going to continue to be major issues here in the state.
So, Paul, is your argument against it primarily because of the way it was adopted, not necessarily what the standards are?
That's my primary objection. I don't like the fact that the feds are telling us if you opt out of them, then you will be threatened with a loss of Title I money, about $800 million for Arizona.
But if it's a good thing...
Well, given the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of transparency in the manner with which it was passed, I was on staff, and I can assure you at the time that not a single member knew about the Common Core standards.
As an educator, though, you're looking at the standards?
I think there's not enough emphasis on fiction. I really think we should be focusing more on fiction, discussion, coaching, and not just teaching didactically or teaching lecture style to the test. And my bigger problem is we were sold, I think, a bill of goods by proponents saying you can opt out whenever you like, which now we're coming to find out it's not true. It takes millions of dollars to opt out, to create new standards. And also, it's the assessment. The assessment is what drives curriculum. And my biggest objection is lack of curricular freedom. As a teacher, I want to be able to have the freedom to teach what I think my students need to know upon graduation.
But that's pretty much a common
No, I actually,
theme, isn't it not, with teachers?
I agree. I agree that the issue ultimately is the assessment, but that's not the conversation we're having at the state level. We're having a conversation about the standards, right? The Common
Most
Core.
people confuse them.
Yeah,
Everybody does.
Yeah,
There are
explain the difference.
three parts. Standards are what students know and need to should know and be able to do, right? So you have a few there. I wrote down a couple here just so that the audience had some idea of what they were. Math, third grade. Explain equivalence of fractions in special cases and compare fractions. That's a standard. Now, what's next is how do you assess that standard? And it's the assessment, and I agree with you completely, it's the assessment that drives instruction. If it's a multiple choice guess test, then instruction's going to narrow to that kind of format. If it's open-ended or if it's discussion-oriented, then teaching and learning is going to lend itself
That's
that way.
a knock on Ames, too,
Well, it's
right?
just a knock on the idea, not really of Ames, of just having standardized tests, multiple choice standardized tests be the way that we demonstrate
But have
learning.
teachers teach to the test, practice, then get the test.
Sure, I mean, how do you,
But
you know,
what
how
do
do you,
kids really know?
We could turn this into a multiple choice test and we would destroy
Exactly.
the test, the text, pardon me. And so the issue then is not necessarily the standards per se, but how are we assessing them? Now let me add one more thing, consequences. So what if we had a standard and an assessment, but it was not part of anybody's grade? Would anybody pay attention to it? Kurt, you can be honest with this one.
No.
No, and so it's the consequences, really, and in this case, the consequence of having federal money taken away that turns up the heat or turns down the heat on how much emphasis we put on, particularly, in my opinion, the assessment of the standards.
Well, I think we're going to have to come right back after
Okay.
a break, and we'll continue the conversation. Welcome back, and with us we have Representative Paul Boyer, and we have Mr. David Garcia with us, or Dr. Garcia, I'm sorry. I apologize for that. And we're talking about Common Core and issues confronting education today.
And the politicization of education is one of the things that you can't talk about Common Core without talking about that subject as well. And where does it end? What's going to happen here?
Well, when we get back control of our education system, I think that's when we can actually start focusing on the real issues, and that's the education of our children, and not worried about losing federal dollars because we're not jumping through hoops.
You're a teacher. Are you afraid of, do you spend enough time teaching, do you think? Really teaching? Or do you have to teach to standards?
I wish I always want more time. I teach history and literature, and I never have enough time. I only had 4 days on Napoleon. Can you believe that? I wish I had at least 3-4 weeks on Napoleon. So I think that's always going to be a tension for teachers. But when you have further state, federal, administrative things that hoops you have to jump through, I mean, teachers are counselors. Sometimes they're doing. They're taking the students out to the park, or they're doing things they shouldn't have to be doing. We just don't have enough time with
How
our
many
students.
education bills do we have this session?
I've had quite a few number assigned to my committee, and I've killed quite a few.
Right. No, you think it's one of clearly the top
It is.
committees, meaning you have more bills than the average committee.
That's right.
To me, that's demonstrating, and as a conservative, it bothers me that we have so much activity on the education side with people who really don't know that much about education.
Which is why I have a bill, Title 15, that repeals multiple statutes in Title 15, which is the education statutes.
Good for you.
Well, we've got, at least from an academic standpoint, one of the things we talk about is we in education, we call it the fifth grade problem. And the fifth grade problem is everybody's been to fifth grade, so they think they understand education, right? And you can't take that away from people. Education is an enormous, important part of people's lives. It shapes who you are. It shapes your experiences. So you don't want to discount that. However, we always have the challenge of getting students ready for a world that was different than the world when any one of us was in school, right? Things have always changed, and I'm not sure we're ever going to get past those politics per se, because we're always going to have this tension of, look, when I was in school, we didn't have X, but today our demands of students have changed. The amount of information that they have access to, just at a minimum, for example, is so much more than when I was in school and when you guys were in school.
Yeah, Frank was personal friends with a paddle.
There you go.
I was, as a matter of fact.
And so I think we're always going to have this tension of working with the community on how we're going to continue to change and evolve education.
I wonder, though, and in the debate on Common Core, I have yet to hear where it's necessarily a bad thing, that it's going to really injure students.
Well, where I agree with Representative Boyer is anytime you get on the federal train and you start drinking the federal whiskey, then you get stuck with everything they want to bring down the path. And you may be okay with what they bring down the path today. You may not like what they're going to bring down the path tomorrow.
Well, although,
and we fall into this trap all the time.
yeah, well, and there's the issue right there. We fall into this trap all the time. I was a peer consultant for the U.S. Department of Education, meaning I just worked with states. I didn't work for the feds. I was kind of like a consultant, a helper. And I saw states negotiate very, very differently with the federal government. And I saw states who had fantastic education agendas continue to move them forward because they were able to articulate where they were going and how the federal agenda fit in. Arizona has not done the best job of that, but other states have. Washington has done a fine job of that. Tennessee, for example, who has its direction, has done a fine. Florida, another state who's done a fine job maintaining their direction.
But it's difficult to articulate a real vision on education when things just keep churning. I mean, we had Ames. There was a big controversy over Ames test. We finally get the Ames test, and now Ames is gone. I mean, it seems like we're going here and there, helter-skelter, on education in this state. It's just, it's mind-boggling.
That's the part where I would say, can we leave everyone alone for a few years? Just leave everyone alone.
And trust our districts and our charters more to educate our students. I think the emphasis, and I think to address your concern or what you're bringing up, my problem with the Common Core standards, I think because the business community had been so involved with this creation of the standards, there's an emphasis on vocation. Not that vocation is not important. That is a part of education, but it's not the most important part. I think the most important part is making a better student, a better person, and also being civically minded. And I promise you, as you do the first two, the vocation will come into play. And a student will be competent, they will be confident, they will be articulate, they'll know how to write, they'll know about math and science. But by focusing specifically on vocation, I think that the market, that may not be in 5 years on STEM, maybe it's something else. The market is always evolving, but if you have students who are prepared intrinsically for whatever the market is going to do, then you have a well-prepared student.
Let me ask you this. If we go through and the legislature does opt out of Common Core, what's the impact?
Well,
Fiscally?
practically, we'd have to revert back, I suppose, to the current standards. Now, I teach literature and history. I actually adhere to the social studies standards because there are no social studies standards that have been adopted by the state. And so I suspect that would be the case for language arts and math and science as well. The physical, the financial, so that is a problem, and that's where my federal issue comes into play. So we're being threatened with the loss of $800 million, maybe more, of Title I money if we don't have jumped through the hoops and had it approved by a federal bureaucrat in DC to say these standards meet our approval.
And
You'll take the money.
well, I mean, is there any? You brought up the negotiation.
Sure.
Who in those other states negotiated on behalf of that particular state? Was it the superintendent of public
Well,
instruction?
it was
the governor.
It was state leadership, and it was because states had a direction they were going. And I think there's kind of mentioned we need to know where we're going at the end of the day. And I think that is the primary issue we need to decide in Arizona. Is where are we going?
Is there an option for a do-over?
Yes, but we'd have to have it approved by the feds. So Texas, they created their own college and career readiness standards, and they were approved by the feds. We'd have to take some time, and it would take some time to approve them. We'd have to have a review process. We'd have to have input from teachers, from all the stakeholders, and that would take some time, and it would take some money.
Well, if you don't abolish it, if you stay within Common Core and then try to make some changes, for whatever changes it is that you want to make, I mean, wouldn't that be maybe a more prudent way to go?
You know, and that is an option. And my frustration with this is it wasn't transparent. These standards, they might be okay, they might be decent, they might be something that we should really teach say our students need to teach or be taught under. But I think we should all know going in with our eyes wide open what exactly they are, and I don't think we're there yet.
Interesting discussion. I don't know if we solved anything, but it's been.
Thank you for coming down.
Yeah, it's been a great
No,
discussion.
we know there'll be more bills next session and the session
Exactly.
after that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Continued success to you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Stay with us. It's a great conversation on Common Core, one that we're going to continue, I'm sure. Also, we'd like to hear from you. If you have any questions, any comments, just go ahead and email us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for being with us. That'll do it for the 48.
Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
The 48th is presented in part by Eastmark, the mark of something special, currently offering over 30 beautiful new quick move-in homes.